When we think about physical collaborations of the war kind in Africa, we tend to think about spears. Now, these spears are not incorrect because all over the world it is true that the majority of people use spears for war as they are easy to make and very dynamic as a weapon. Even places that have swords tend to use spears. But let's view other weapons that Africans had. These are handheld daggers, and they can be used as a stabbing weapon or as a throwing weapon. The ones without the big handle can be used as a throwing weapon, but majority of the time they're used for very close combat or finishing an opponent off. But these are Bantu throwing knives. And these throwing knives are ubiquitous within the Bantu people. Some of the Bantu people abandoned this culture a long time ago, but a lot of people within the Bantu were using these all the way up until the 1900s, when war became a tool in the background over talking. Because these knives don't really belong to one Bantu culture, there's many names from Pinga to Mamba to Bega, Sicela. There's like a lot of words that you can use for this thing. And it's also in the Zulu version, which I can't find for some reason. There's a sickle. It's like a sickle, like the type that, but then you throw it. These are technically axes mixed with points, and so they sort of work like an axe. They can cut you and they can stab you at the same time when they're thrown. These are southern Bantu war axes, and like that throwing blade, they have something called whiskers which come out, and what these whiskers do is you can hook somebody's either weapon or their shield and get it out of the way so that you can attack them with the same axe or a different weapon. This is probably what they're getting at, or where the inspiration for that throwing knife came from. Most of the ones you just saw are from Zimbabwe. The Zulu ones are a little different, but they too serve the same purposes. If you look at Congo, it gets a little more complicated because their axes are so elaborate, although they have some simple ones, obviously, but they have some elaborate ones that it's crazy. The ones I'm providing from Congo are from the Songye people, and they have multiple names depending on what they look like. The one with the gaps in between, which is usually fastened with a human figurine or some kind of image, is called Nzapa, and it's more of a ceremonial axe. And the other one that is kind of bent around and solid formed is called Kolinda or Gulinda. You can see that they have the ability to hook just like the other ones.
This is an artifact spotlight for the Clash of Empires exhibition. Today I'm talking about a Zulu axe. This is a thing called an isizenza. Now, for fighting, the Zulus generally relied upon spears. The axe was more of a prestige item. You can see there's quite a lot of metal, quite a lot of craftsmanship gone into the making of the shape of this blade. So these weren't as common as spears. They tended to be carried by somebody with a bit of authority. One of the advantages is that you can use it to signal. You can hold it above your head and point with the blade, and those around you will know what your intentions are. At the same time, there were two different designs of blade. Ones with much bigger blades were major prestige items. These ones with curved blades were actually used for fighting as well. So although it was probably somebody with a certain amount of status who carried this, you would still go into battle and still fight with this. And you could use it to try and hook your enemy's shield with the edge of the axe there, and obviously chop him down like it's a hatchet in any other war across the ages. So this is a Zulu axe, and it's called isizenza.
Next up, swords. And of course, swords were used from South Africa all the way to Congo. If you notice, I'm only covering this region of Africa. We're going to cover other places next time. But from South Africa to Congo, swords were used. Some were used to cut wood as bush knives, but then they were also used for weaponry, as you can see in multiple written accounts. The Zimbabweans had some pretty long and short swords, but theirs were still shorter than any other found in Europe. And of course, the Congolese had multiple crooked swords or sort of tapered swords. They sort of look like the axes that the other people use in other places, and it also looks like the kopesh used by the Egyptians. Yes, the Zulus did have swords, as you can see in a dictionary written in the 1800s, where if it was stolen, they would have written an asterisk next to it. But this is even worse. You can see here it's written Isieme or Isieng or Yense. I don't know how to pronounce that. And this is where is it? Cut down as maize, imfe with a knife, cut down, slash with a sword. Isiense is a sword, noun. Yensega or yensega, I don't know which one. Get slashed, cut down with a knife or a sword. Now, and I think it's and the is to cut with a blade. Now, the Zulus did have blades and they had used them in singular battles. They never really used them in war, almost never. Now, obviously, there are some instances where some people carried blades, but during the Zulu times, when they started carrying blades, something that people underestimate is that they carried more than one weapon. The Itwa, which I'm not going to put on this list, which people are very familiar with, that was the main weapon, because spears in whatever country is going to be the main weapon before you have guns, or if you use bow and arrows, a spear is always going to take the front seat. But swords existed, and you will see that women carrying them, both ceremonially and maybe even realistically, is not unusual for these parts of southern Africa. In Congo, in the book Through the Dark Continent, in the 1800s, early 1800s, the author writes, the Manyema then have several noteworthy peculiarities. Their arms are short swords scabbarded with wood, to which are hung small brass and iron bells, a light, beautifully balanced spear, probably next to the spear of Uganda, the most perfect in the world. He encountered a different tribe, and this is what he had to say about them. At Wane Kirumbu, we found a large native forge and smithy where there were about a dozen smiths busily at work. The iron ore is very pure here. Here were the broad-bladed spears of southern Urega and the equally broad knives of all sizes, from the small waist knife, an inch and a half in length, to the heavy Roman sword like cleaver. He then describes another man from a completely different tribe, and he says, from his left shoulder across his chest was suspended the sword of the billhook pattern already described in the passages about Ichengu. Terrifying pictures like these that show executions of captured prisoners or warmen make it very easy to realize what they would have been using these weapons for. The final weapon I'm going to talk about today, though there's so many weapons I could talk about, even in one of these categories I could make variants. It's a bow and arrow, and typically bow and arrows in Bantu and Khoisan people would be laced, or they would place poison on it so that they can assure your death. Even if it as much as nicks you, you would secure your own death. Now I know what you're thinking. Weren't there just hunting tools? Didn't they just use them to hunt? I mean, today they have them, but clearly they use them for hunting. And the Khoisan, aren't those just a peaceful race of people who chase around rabbits and eat fish sometimes, just chilling and being nice people? Well, not according to the books written by Europeans who encountered them. So here's a very interesting part. It says, it came even before we had finished our showering. We heard a woman scream loud. We rushed out and met some Wangwana running towards us, and among them a woman with a dwarf's arrow in her breast. What's this? What's this? We asked, and they cried out, the dwarf shot this woman while she was drawing water, and they are coming in immense numbers towards us from all the other villages. It's a war, prepare yourself. We were not a bit too soon. We had scarcely but on our belts and seized our guns before the vicious wretches were upon us and shooting their reed arrows in clouds. They screamed and yelled just like monkeys. Many of our people fell dead instantly from the poison before we could get together and fire on them. By the way, the dwarves that he's talking about are pygmies. They're not dwarves as we would consider a dwarf today. I remember watching the quote unquote documentary of a show called Deadliest Warrior, and they put Shaka Zulu against William Wallace. And then they made Shaka Zulu lose, which was hilarious because, first of all, the guy who was representing Shaka Zulu didn't know anything about the weapons that the Zulus had, especially if you're going to use the king of the Zulus. Now, here's the funny part. William Wallace was probably armed with a sword or whatever. Shaka Zulu had a gun. No, so I'm going to say that again one more time for you guys. Shaka Zulu imported. Let me start again. Shaka Zulu, before Shaka Zulu was born, they imported guns like muskets from Delagoa Bay, which was connected to the Portuguese. Shaka Zulu had guns, and there's no way he would have lost against William Wallace because William Wallace would not be prepared. Shaka Zulu had bow and arrows with poison tips. He didn't use them in war, but he had them. If he was going to go against one-on-one against some fool, he would have used it. He had swords. He had fuel lit, not fuel, but oil lit throwing oils that they would throw at enemies. I didn't put it on this list because I don't think it's a weapon that would qualify as a real weapon. I mean, it's so easy to move away from it. It's like a petrol bomb. None of the stuff that they put in there was that interesting. They put the axe, they put the spear, they put a shillelagh or a knobkerrie, and then they were like, yeah. And then the worst part was when they put something that you chew and you spit in the face of the enemy, which was ridiculous. And also the axe, they didn't even use it the way that it was supposed to be used. They didn't put the throwing axe, which they had. And so to know that that was their best attempt at a documentary about fighting when you could easily figure these things out just by reading a dictionary or by reading diaries written by the people who observe them. Come on. And that's just the Zulus. This is, by the way, I haven't even covered Ethiopians who had weapons of a man, like they were just crazy. Or West Africans who too were crazy. By the way, at this time in the 17, 18, 1900s, these guys had guns. They had muskets.